They called it just a mailbox, but for one black ranch owner, it became the symbol of something far bigger, something that cut deep into the everyday battles of living while black in America. Night after night, the so-called HOA cops sped by, smashing his property, mocking his presence, daring him to fight back. He could have given up. He could have stayed silent. But instead, he built something they never expected. What he did next didn't just protect his land, it exposed the ugly truth of who had been trying to break him all along. It started in the quiet stretches of a ranch tucked just outside a growing suburban community. The land was wide open and alive with the kind of peace only someone who worked for it could truly appreciate. For Marcus, a middle-aged black man who had poured his savings, sweat, and hope into this property, the ranch was more than land, it was freedom. It was proof that no matter the odds, he could carve out a place of his own. The mornings were his favorite. Dew clung to the fence posts, sunlight spilled across the tall grass, and the rhythm of life felt steady. Horses grazed along the back pasture, chickens picked at the dirt, and the air carried the scent of hay. Marcus loved those mornings. He loved knowing that his hard work had given him the stability. The mailbox at the edge of his long gravel driveway, simple as it was, became part of that routine. Bills, letters, and the occasional catalog all reminded him of the life he had built, ordinary, secure, and self-sustaining. But what Marcus didn't know then was that this simple marker, this mailbox, would soon become the target of something ugly, something meant to send a message. In the beginning, the damage was small. A dent here, a loosened screw there. He brushed it off as careless driving or perhaps a delivery truck clipping it by accident. But the dents grew deeper, more deliberate, until the wooden post leaned awkwardly to one side. One evening, he found the box itself twisted open, the metal torn like someone had struck it with force. At first, Marcus replaced it quietly. He was used to fixing things after all. A ranch always demanded repairs. He dug a new post, set it in concrete, and mounted a fresh mailbox. Problem solved. At least, that's what he thought. But the distraction kept coming back, and each time, it grew more intentional. Tires left tracks in the dirt, veering sharply from the road straight into his property. Some mornings, the mailbox wasn't just broken, it was flattened, smashed as if someone had aimed for it. Neighbors noticed. They whispered about kids being reckless or teenagers having fun, but Marcus sensed something heavier in the air. This wasn't random. It wasn't careless. It felt targeted. The so-called HOA patrol didn't make things better. Dressed in uniforms they bought themselves, driving around like enforcers of their own rules, they claimed to keep the neighborhood orderly. But Marcus had felt their eyes on him long before the mailbox trouble started. Their glances lingered longer than necessary. Their comments, casual but cutting, always reminded him he was different, that he didn't quite belong in their picture of how things should look. Still, Marcus kept his composure. He woke early, cared for his animals, and worked his land with pride. He told himself not to overthink, not to let suspicion eat away at the peace he had built. Yet every morning when he walked to that gravel edge and saw the splintered remains of his mailbox, he felt the sting. This wasn't just about metal and wood. It was about being reminded again and again that his place here was being challenged. He rebuilt. Over and over. He rebuilt. Each time sturdier than the last. First wood, then heavier posts, then reinforced steel brackets. But the harder he tried to stand strong, the harder the hits came. The mailbox became more than a box for letters, it became a battlefield. And Marcus, a man who had never asked for trouble, found himself in a war he hadn't chosen. He began to notice patterns. The damage often happened at night, usually after the HOA patrol had driven by. Sometimes he'd see the glare of headlights at the edge of his property, idling too long before pulling away. It was as if they wanted him to know they were watching. Each incident chipped away at the sense of security he had built. The ranch that once felt like a sanctuary now carried an undercurrent of threat. He stopped trusting the quiet. Every creak of a fence, every car slowing down near his driveway made him wonder, was it them again? For a while, Marcus considered reporting it. But to who? The local sheriff's office brushed off complaints like these. Property damage? A mailbox? Not worth their time. not worth their paperwork. To them, it was trivial. To Marcus, it was a warning. And that's what made it dangerous, because this wasn't just about a mailbox anymore. It was about control. It was about a group of people who thought they could chip away at his pride, his patience, his presence, one blow at a time. Marcus didn't know when it would escalate, but he felt it coming. Like storm clouds gathering over a horizon, there was a heaviness in the air that refused to leave, and as much as he wanted to cling to the quiet mornings, to the rhythm of ranch life, he knew he couldn't ignore the signs. The mailbox wasn't just being destroyed. It was being used as a message, a challenge, and sooner or later, Marcus would have to answer it. The pattern had turned undeniable. What once seemed like random acts of vandalism now had a rhythm, almost like a ritual. Every few nights, the same outcome. Marcus's mailbox shattered, his property line violated, his peace ripped apart. At first, he tried to ignore it. He told himself not to give his tormentors the satisfaction of a reaction, but the cost was more than physical. Each time he hammered a new post into the ground, he felt the weight of their message. You don't belong here. One night, he decided to watch. He parked his truck a few yards from the road, engine off, windows down, the air heavy with silence. Hours passed, the night sky thick with stars. Then headlights. Two beams cutting through the dark, swerving closer, slower, almost circling. The vehicle crawled to the edge of his driveway, tires crunching the gravel. Marcus's chest tightened. He recognized the SUV. It wasn't kids. It wasn't strangers. It was one of the HOA patrol vehicles, the self-appointed enforcers who treated the neighborhood like their private kingdom. The SUV slowed, paused, then lurched forward. In one calculated move, it swerved off the road and crushed the mailbox flat, wood splintering under the tires. No hesitation. No accident. The vehicle didn't even stop. It kept rolling, steady, deliberate, until the taillights disappeared. Into the night, Marcus sat frozen in his truck, hands gripping the wheel. He had seen it with his own eyes, and worse, he knew they had seen him. This wasn't random destruction anymore. It was intimidation. The next morning, neighbors strolled by as if nothing had happened. Some glanced at the broken mailbox, then quickly looked away. Others shook their heads with sympathetic smiles, the kind that said, "We know, but we won't get involved." Their silence cut as deeply as the act itself. Marcus rebuilt again. But this time, he couldn't let it go. He poured concrete deeper into the ground, bolted steel reinforcements, and welded a new post strong enough to withstand a truck. If they wanted a fight, he thought, then he'd give them something to hit. Days passed. The mailbox stood untouched, as if the patrol had noticed his work and backed off. For a brief moment, Marcus felt a flicker of relief. But the quiet didn't last. Late one evening, just as he was locking the barn, he heard the roar of an engine. The same SUV barreled down the road, faster this time, headlights blinding. It swerved sharply, aiming again. The impact was violent. The crash echoed like a gunshot. But this time, the mailbox didn't fall. The steel post held and shaken, while the SUV's bumper crumpled against it. Sparks flew. The vehicle screeched to a halt, smoke rising from the hood. Marcus stood frozen in the barn doorway, watching. As the driver stumbled out, cursing, kicking at the unbroken mailbox, the man's uniform bore the words HOA Patrol. Not police, not authority, just neighbors who had decided to play enforcers. And now, caught in the open, his rage turned toward Marcus. "You think this'll stop us?" The man shouted into the night. His voice carried across the fields, venom wrapped in arrogance. He spat in the dirt, climbed back into the damaged SUV, and sped away, leaving a trail of smoke and hatred behind. Marcus's hands shook as he locked the barn. He wasn't just dealing with property damage anymore. He was dealing with men who believed they could terrorize him without consequence. The following days were filled with unease. He noticed vehicles slowing near his ranch. Some stopped for minutes at a time, their drivers watching him with cold, lingering stares. His animals grew restless at night, startled by noises along the fence line, footsteps, laughter, distant shouts. The HOA patrol wasn't hiding anymore. They wanted him to know. They wanted him afraid. Marcus began to sleep less. Every creak of the house, every crunch of gravel outside kept him awake. He double-checked locks, kept his phone close, and walked his land with a heavy flashlight, scanning the edges for movement. His sanctuary had become a cage, but fear wasn't the only thing growing inside him. Anger simmered. Every smashed mailbox, every mocking stare, every silent neighbor built into something heavier. He realized this wasn't about the mailbox, it was about control. They wanted to break him, to make him leave the land he had worked so hard to build, and that was something Marcus couldn't allow. So he planned. Quietly, carefully, he began crafting a solution. If they wanted to strike his mailbox again, he would be ready. He reinforced it beyond anything they could imagine, embedding steel deeper, securing it with hidden strength. To the eye, it looked like any other box on any other post. But beneath the surface, it was unmovable. Marcus knew the next attack would come. He didn't know when, or how hard, but he knew they wouldn't stop until they thought they had won. The tension was unbearable, waiting, watching, wondering when the next set of headlights would appear at the edge of his property. And when it did, Marcus vowed the outcome would be different. The night it all came to a head was heavy with silence, the kind that pressed against Marcus's chest and refused to let go. The stars were out, but their glow felt distant, as though even the sky was holding its breath. He had been waiting, half dreading, half determined for this moment. And then, it came. Headlights flared at the end of the gravel road, brighter, angrier, faster than before. The roar of an engine cut through the still air, and Marcus knew instantly, this wasn't just another drive-by. This was the strike. The SUV bore down on his driveway like a predator, tires spitting gravel as it swerved sharply toward the mailbox. But Marcus was ready. Hidden in the shadows of his porch, he watched as the vehicle slammed into the reinforced post with bone-rattling force. The crash was deafening. Metal screamed. Glass shattered. The SUV crumpled like paper against the unmovable steel. Its front end folded, steam hissing from the radiator, headlights flickering like dying stars. The mailbox stood untouched, solid, defiant. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the driver's door burst open. A man stumbled out, clutching his side, his face twisted in rage rather than pain. His uniform, bold letters reading HOA Patrol, was torn and stained with smoke. He staggered forward, pointing a trembling finger at Marcus's porch. "This is your fault," he bellowed, voice hoarse, echoing across the fields. "You think you can outsmart us? You think you can stay here?" Marcus stepped into the glow of the porch light, heart pounding so hard, he thought it might crack his ribs. He didn't say a word. His silence was his weapon. But inside, fear and fury clashed like fire and gasoline. The men's shouts grew louder. Another car pulled up behind the wreck, its headlights spilling across the scene. More uniforms stepped out too, then three faces lit with the same brand of arrogance. It wasn't just one man anymore. It was a mob. Marcus's stomach turned cold. This wasn't about a mailbox. This was about making him small, making him afraid, making him disappear. One of them kicked at the steel post, cursing. Another laughed, mocking, as if the wrecked SUV were just an inconvenience. And then their eyes turned toward Marcus. "You set a trap," one sneered, taking a step closer. "You'll pay for this." His fists clenched at his sides. His land, his home, his safety, all of it was under attack. And there he stood, one man against a pack of aggressors who carried themselves like law, even though they had none. The tension snapped like a whip. One of the patrolmen lunged forward, shoving Marcus hard against the porch rail. The wood creaked under the impact. His breath caught in his chest. Adrenaline surged through his veins, hot and disorienting. For a split second, Marcus thought about fighting back, about swinging, about shoving, about defending himself. But a flash of memory, headlines, names, stories of black men who never got the chance to explain stopped him cold. He knew how this could end. Phones appeared in hands. Neighbors who had pretended not to see suddenly stood at the edges of the road, recording, not helping, not stopping, just documenting, waiting to see if this black man would become another story, another statistic. The patrolman grabbed his shirt, spitting words in his face. "You don't belong here. You never did. Every nerve in Marcus's body screamed with rage. But beneath the rage was a deeper, sharper pain, the reminder that no matter how much he worked, how much he built, there were those who would always see him as less. The sound of sirens split the night. Red and blue lights flooded the scene, washing over twisted metal, over uniforms, over Marcus's trembling hands. Relief should have come. It didn't, because Marcus knew how quickly sirens could turn from salvation to condemnation. The deputies stepped out, surveying the chaos. The wrecked SUV, the mailbox still standing, the crowd of neighbors whispering, phones raised, and Marcus alone, breathless, standing in the center of it all. One of the patrolmen wasted no time. He set this up, he shouted, he tried to kill us. The word struck Marcus like a blow. His chest tightened, his mind raced. They're twisting it, they're flipping it, they're going to make me the villain. The deputies moved in, questioning, writing, glancing from Marcus to the wreck, from the patrol to the mailbox. Each second felt like an eternity. The crowd grew thicker, their murmurs rising, feeding on the tension like vultures circling. Marcus felt the world tilt beneath him. He had done nothing wrong. He had defended his home. And yet here he was, under the sharp glare of suspicion, while the ones who terrorized him stood shouting lies. In that moment, Marcus realized something terrifying. It didn't matter that the mailbox stood untouched. It didn't matter that the SUV was in pieces, proof of who had attacked. What mattered was perception. Who would they believe? The black rancher or the self-appointed cops who claimed to protect the neighborhood? The deputies' radios crackled. Their pens hovered. The patrolmen shouted louder. Marcus's pulse roared in his ears, and as the flashing lights painted the night in chaos, Marcus understood with bone-deep certainty this wasn't just a battle for his mailbox anymore. This was a battle for his dignity, his future, his right to exist on his own land. The question wasn't whether he had won or lost. The question was, would anyone see the truth? Or would this night, like so many before it, end with the weight of injustice pressing him down? The deputy's gaze settled on him, unreadable, unblinking. The crowd held its breath. The patrol's lies hung thick in the air, and in that suffocating silence, Marcus realized whatever happened next would change everything. The flashing lights painted Marcus's land long after the wreck had been cleared away. Broken glass sparkled in the gravel, smoke still hung faint in the night air, and the reinforced mailbox, solid, untouched, stood like a quiet witness to everything that had just unfolded. The deputies questioned, documented, and eventually, they left. No arrests, no charges, just paperwork. The HOA patrol members, loud and furious minutes before, walked away with their bruised pride, their wrecked SUV, and their version of the story echoing through the neighborhood. Marcus was left in silence. His land was still his mailbox still stood, but something in him had shifted. The ranch he once saw as a sanctuary now felt marked, scarred by the weight of intimidation, and yet there was defiance in that silence too. The mailbox hadn't just withstood a vehicle, it had withstood the pressure to break, to give in, to leave. And in that small victory, Marcus found something more powerful than anger. He found proof of his resilience, but resilience came with a cost. The following days brought whispers, sideways glances, and a flood of rumors. Some neighbors called him reckless, others muttered that he had baited the patrol, that he had gone too far. Few spoke of the months of harassment, the smashed mailboxes, the intimidation that had led him to that night. That's the way it often goes. The world rarely sees the full story. It only sees the climax, the moment of impact, and too often, it blames the victim for standing their ground. For Marcus, that was the heaviest truth. He had defended himself without violence, without breaking the law, without lifting a hand, and still, suspicion lingered in the air like smoke. But Marcus didn't move. He didn't sell his ranch. He didn't pack his things and vanish, the way his tormentors had hoped. He rebuilt again, not the mailbox this time, but his own sense of peace. He worked his land, cared for his animals, and carried on his life with quiet dignity. Every day that he stayed was an act of resistance, because for black men like Marcus, the fight isn't always about winning in the eyes of the world. Sometimes, The fight is about existing at all, staying rooted in a place that others would rather see you pushed out of. The impact of that night stretched far beyond Marcus's ranch. It was a reminder that racism doesn't always come in the form of slurs or outright violence. Sometimes it comes dressed in uniforms that hold no authority, in neighbors who play at power, in a system that looks the other way when harassment wears a mask of rules or order. And the mailbox? It became more than a mailbox. To Marcus, it was a symbol of endurance, of standing firm even when the world crashes into you with all its weight. To others who heard his story, it became a mirror reflecting the countless ways small acts of intimidation can erode safety, dignity, and belonging. This wasn't just Marcus's battle. It was the story of so many others who have had their boundaries crossed, their property violated, their very presence questioned, not because of what they did, but because of who they are. It raises a haunting truth. In America, for too many, survival isn't just about working hard or building a life. It's about weathering the storms of suspicion, the daily tests of belonging, the unspoken threats that whisper, "You don't belong here." And yet, Marcus's story carries something else too. Hope. Because even in the face of harassment, he didn't break. Even when the system shrugged, he didn't walk away. He stayed. He endured. He reminded everyone watching, whether they admitted it or not, that resilience itself is resistance, but resilience alone isn't enough. Stories like Marcus's are happening every day, to people whose names will never trend, whose struggles will never make headlines, whose strength is tested in silence. And the question isn't whether they'll keep standing. The question is, how much longer will we let them stand alone? Every smashed mailbox, every suspicious glance, every act of harassment that goes unchecked tells us something about the world we live in. It tells us about the systems that look away, about the neighbors who choose silence over justice, about the cost of belonging when your very existence is seen as a challenge. So ask yourself, what would you have done if you lived on that road, watching the wreckage, hearing the lies shouted in the night? Would you have stayed silent? Or would you have stood beside him, telling the truth? Because that's the choice we all face, not just on Marcus's ranch, but in our neighborhoods, our schools, our workplaces, our country. Silence protects the aggressor. Truth protects the victim. Marcus's mailbox still stands today, stronger than ever. But the story it tells isn't about steel and concrete. It's about a man who refused to be erased. It's about a community forced to look in the mirror. And it's about all of us, about whether we'll keep letting injustice crash through lives unchecked, or whether we'll finally say, enough. The mailbox withstood the impact. The question is, will we?